Port of Ostende, Hellevoetsluis, and OD Eimond became partner. Companies like Blue Power Synergy, BPS, and Indaclor, and from each country a knowledge partner, Hogeschool Zeeland, Cerima, Solent University, and Ghent University, which makes a partnership of 10 partners. Yes, next please. And together, together with these partners, we have worked closely in the last, well, let's say 3.5 years, almost 4 years, to realize what has been realized, focusing on developing tools and methods, pilot projects, monitoring, and communication and dissemination activities. These were the 4 main topics of the project, and which resulted in outputs. So we had some methods and tools as a result of the project, and we will show that later in the videos. As an example, a method for energy audits, a method to assess potential of renewable energy, a method to identify energy savings options in small and medium-sized ports, decision-making tools, studies, and a monitoring program. And all of these methods and tools can be used by other ports. So that's a big advantage of what has been realized, been tested in the partner ports, and can be used by other ports and organizations in the 2C program area, but also in other areas. Yes, next. When it comes to the pilot partners, we have realized 2 small wind turbines in the port platform, flexible renewable energy distribution, medium-sized wind turbine, smart line pontoon, energy-saving link span, a turbine to produce electricity from waste steam, and an energy production and storage pontoon, and a solar panels in water. We will show that in the movie, in the video. And results. The main result, of course, is carbon reduction and savings. Reduction of carbon emissions with 20%, increase of use of coast-related renewables, 10%, increase of acceptance, 50%, an increase of usage of clear tools and concepts from 0 to almost 30%. So we can say that we have increased a lot of issues we were focusing on in the project. So I think that's my final sheet. And so you can see where we started in 2014, 2015, and we are now in 2021. So the journey took us 6 years to where we are now. And I think the video shows exactly what we have reached in pictures. Thank you for now.
Okay.
Marijke?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I have only seen one sheet, the starting sheet, and not the other ones during the presentation. Is that also the case with other people?
I hope not. Can someone confirm that they have seen all of the slides, please?
Yes, I've seen all of the slides. It's not impressive.
So maybe, Jan, there's something going wrong with your connection at this point. Maybe try going out of the meeting and back in, if that's an option for you.
Yes.
Okay, I can see all the other people are saying they have no problem. So let's hope it's just a glitch in your system, and we can just go on at this moment. Okay, so once again, thank you, William, for your introduction and to give us a little bit of history and insight in how the project was realized. And then I would really like to present to you our PECS project video. It's very, very new. It was finished yesterday, so you get the avant-premiere, as we say. As I said before, it would be best if everybody can turn off their video, which I see everybody is doing, and let's hope we can show you the video without any glitches at this end, because with all of this technology, it doesn't always go as smoothly as one would hope. Should there be any trouble with the video and watching it, just be aware that it will be provided on our website in the next coming days, so you will have the opportunity to see it again right there. I also noticed there was already one question in the chat if the slides will be made available. Yes, we will make sure that the slides of this presentation of the entire event will be available for you. And we are also recording this webinar, so you can have the option of watching it back again. So let's go and let's see if we can show you our project movie. So there you have it. This is our entire project, which we worked on so many years. In a nutshell, in just under 5 minutes, I think it showcases our project nicely. I hope you all enjoyed that video. We enjoyed making it. And as I already said, you will be seeing it popping up in the next couple of days and weeks on social media, on our website. And you have been the first audience to have ever seen it. So the next part in this introduction and the parts about the results of the project is on the survey that we did between the ports and all of our stakeholders. And I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of what we did with this survey, and then at the very end we'll come back to you and ask your help to get us further along with the results. So as for the survey itself, you can see here that the goal of the survey was that we wanted to understand the level of sustainability and the energy efficiency knowledge, but also the motivation and the level of investments that were already made in ports and marinas, or where ports and marinas were thinking of investing in low carbon technologies, yes or no. And we also wanted to know if our project, our PECS project, had any impact on those decisions. If, for example, you were inspired by the pilots that we showcased in our project to invest in something similar in your ports. The main target groups for our survey were, of course, ports. Those are our main targets. Ports and port authorities, but also governments or decision makers, especially where there was a port in the vicinity. But we are also very interested to hear about port-based or port-related companies or businesses. And of course, as we have knowledge institutions in our project, we wanted to have their opinion on the matter as well. At the very end of the project, we set up a task force for this, to set up this questionnaire with a whole lot of tailored questions for each target group. It was distributed via our newsletter, website, social media, and in the partners network. But unfortunately, with everything being digital these days, I think people were a bit fed up with another webinar, another survey, having to fill in things digitally. And the response was unfortunately quite limited. We only had 48 people filling it in, with just 25 that completed the entire survey. So that meant those were not enough to draw any actual conclusions on the topic, which we would have liked to show you today. We could collect some interesting data. For example, we reached as biggest target group the port-based or port-related companies. So those people participated quite a lot in our survey, for which we are very thankful. Some ports as well, and a couple of knowledge institutions, but as I said, not that many. Apparently, the biggest majority of the people were situated in the 2Cs area. So PECS is an Interreg 2Cs project, so it makes sense that most of our stakeholders or network is situated in this area, which does not mean that we are not interested in what happens beyond the 2Cs region. It's just as interesting as this one. But for the answers that we had now, it was mostly people in the 2Cs area. Then within the port-based companies, because that was the biggest response group, we had some insights on how the PECS project raised awareness of energy savings, carbon reductions, and so on via the communication actions that we already undertook. So that were the results. And if we asked them about their energy use and if they knew what that was like at the moment, then 14 of them already carried out reviews about their energy use using primarily third-party tools, but also some people that refer to the Green Bridge project, which was initiated via the PECS project. So that's, of course, interesting to know as well. The majority of the people that answered this survey were not aware of the PECS tools, but I put here yet because I hope with our final conference and our morning session demonstration webinar, let's hope people will find their way towards our website where they can download the tools for free to use. Also interesting on the principle of energy cooperations, which we had showcased in the project as well. Most of them, they were aware of the principle and what the benefits are, but again, some were not. So here again, an option to communicate about the results in the project. And also, if there was already cooperation, we got some answers on how formalized these agreements were within these ports. And then on the investments in low carbon technologies, again, for the port-based companies, 9 of them have already invested mostly in solar, some in wind. The investment amounts were somewhere between 0 and 1 million, so not the big amounts. And most of them wanted to invest in the near future. When we asked them, why don't you invest, or why are you not going to install any of these technologies, then mostly I think that's a logical one. There is no or not enough budget. But we see once and again also lack of sustainable vision and the fact that they don't have enough knowledge to know what to install. So we hope the project can help with those things as well. So as we said, there were not enough answers to draw conclusions specifically on port authorities or knowledge institutions, but we hope that will change in the next coming days, because that's my conclusion and my final plea. We will set the survey open again for another 10 days, and we would very much like for all of you who are present here today to fill it in for us, so we can have a bit more results and we can have some conclusions to put forward openly and publicly on our website as well. So it will be in your benefit to see those results and what we made of it. So if I can ask your help after the session today, in the next couple of days, we will be sending you the link again for the survey, and we would appreciate it very highly if you could take just a couple of minutes to fill it in for us. So that concludes my part of the final conference, and I'm very happy to announce that the majority now of the next couple of minutes, let's say, or the biggest block, will be on a panel discussion. Just some pointers here for this panel discussion. I would like to ask the people here on the screen to start their videos, if that's possible. And then Mr. Wim Stubbe, who's lead partner of the project and business developer for the Port of Ostend, will moderate this panel discussion for us. Hello, everyone. We're very happy to have you here. And I will stop sharing my screen so you have the full advantage of the videos at this point. Just for good measure, if I can ask all of you to, well, Wim will moderate, but if a question is asked and you are appointed to answer it, then please answer the question fully, and then someone else, if you want to respond to that, just raise your hand and then respond when the first person has stopped talking, because in a digital setting, it's very hard if people start talking between one another. So with no further ado, I will give you the full screen and the floor is yours, Wim.
Yep. Oops, we are still in the dub session. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see your haircut. I can see some have hairdressers, others haven't. So good to see you. Life in a small and medium-sized port and in marinas is not easy. It's life is more than picking up a telephone from a politician, and therefore I would like to thank very much Jerry for coming in, because he just coming back from piloting a ship. 5 minutes ago he was still on board of a ship. So as you can see, life in a small and medium-sized port is more than just some kind of paper trails that need to be followed. I would like to thank also Jan Geroms to be inside. Laurie, thank you very much for being there. Nick, thank you for taking the time, and Yvonne, who is kicking already my chair the whole morning, thank you for still being here in the meeting room. The session, it's unfortunately not live. It would have much more fun to have to sit around on the table and to have a discussion. Nevertheless, we do what we can do, and I will ask you a few questions. And with the first question, I would like to ask you one by one that you present a little bit yourself, your role in the organization, and then we go on how things might move on. The first question that I will ask each of you one by one is, you have been working now 4 years within PECS. What is for you as an organization the most important result of the work that has been done within the project? So please introduce yourself for the public, and then if you can answer this question. So I will ask one by one. So I will ask Jerry to come in, and I will close and mute myself so that I will not make strange noise when you speak, Jerry. So and then I will ask Jan, then I will ask Laurie, then I'll ask Nick, and then I'll ask Yvonne to do the same. Thank you.
Good morning. And Wim, thank you very much. And for someone with a beard like that to suggest that none of us have been to barbers is colossal. But it's lovely to see everyone. My name is Jeremy Clark. I've been a pilot in Portsmouth for over 20 years and worked in the port for over 25 years. My job is as a pilot, but as those of you who run ports will know, pilots do very little and infrequently. So in my own time, initially, I used to look at the port's capital finance objectives and go away to Europe and try and find some funding. That was 20 years ago. Ports are very interesting in the UK. We've got lots of different models. We've got private ports, we've got public ports, we've got municipal ports, we've got trust ports. What PECS has done for us has been colossal, and it's more than the small part of the PECS project itself. Everyone will be aware of what has happened with Brexit, and everyone will be aware of the problems we now have with the environment. What port energy and carbon savings has given the port is a springboard into what all UK ports are now being required to do. So from being a pilot with a few projects, it suddenly became very apparent only a year or so ago that the projects that I was doing were now core to the business of the port. So as a municipal port, and as a port that's owned by a city that is currently having a congestion charge imposed, a clean air zone, because we exceed nitrous oxide limits in the city, our business objective now is to stop polluting the air around us and to make ourselves acceptable. We are a port in the middle of a city. Now, a few years ago, I would have said, well, a port shouldn't be situated in the middle of a city, but we can now turn that around. If we can have short sea shipping, which is the most economical and sustainable type of shipping, then in the heart of a city is exactly where a port should be. What PECS has allowed me to do is to show that with the new link span, which has been improved sustainability-wise by the PECS program by putting in soft start electric motors, LED lighting, biologically degradable hydraulic fluid, and steel that will last for a longer period, is it's given us something that points the whole port towards a more sustainable future. But more importantly, even than that, and this was a late development between Wim and myself, air quality. The air quality sensors we put in are now being copied by other ports, and it's put us well ahead of everyone else. And I've taken a little bit too much time in a fair introduction, but that's Portsmouth and that's me. So do come back if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. Very, very clear introduction. And I will ask Jan to kick the ball.
Good morning. My name is Jan Gerons. I'm a member of the Innover Group of Companies, and the Innover Group of Companies is a group of companies which is creating solutions for circular circular economy issues nowadays. We have started over 30 years ago being a, between brackets, waste company, waste incineration company, but we have been able to turn around this key responsibility of us towards participating and creating, helping to create a circular economy. And myself, I am responsible for managing our major capex investments throughout Europe from a financial and administrative point of view. We have been looking towards several ports prior to creating our business case within the Dunkirk environment. And that's what I've learned, that creating the overall circular economy for an industrial plant such as us, ports make great opportunities. They are the first places where you have to look at in order to have a business case that fits all elements of circular economy. We have been able to do so on the Uniclor project in the Dunkirk environment. And we are pleased to have been able to participate to the project with this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Happy to hear your conclusion. Laurie, as you are still on the beach in Miami, I'm happy you take your time. It's evening session. I know you are ready to go to the bar, so please give your impressions.
Yes, thank you, Wim. It's lovely here on the beach. Laurie Wright, I'm at Solent University. I am the university's lead for environment and engineering research, and within that group, we particularly focus on sustainable energy systems, material systems, and transportation, particularly in the maritime environment. So that's really our involvement in PECS has been looking there. Within the project, we're looking at how do we actually measure these carbon savings, how do we manage, how do we assess where we are and where we might go. So we're working with our colleagues. The biggest takeaway for me of the project, and perhaps it's even a little bit of a cliche, but is the nature of ports. And actually, I think when you first step into them, it's very easy to become overwhelmed and a bit lost in terms of the carbon savings. Can you actually make huge significant savings in these spaces? But the PECS project has shown that it is possible to make some quite significant energy and carbon savings in port environments, and actually linking that to wider maritime. There is what I would say is hope that we make things like the 2030 targets for carbon reduction, the 2050 net zero, and the collaboration that's come out of the project, in my mind, is one of the biggest things that has led us to making those kind of savings across the project. So I'd really encourage anyone who is a port owner to work to learn from each other in this space, because it is entirely possible to make these savings, and it saves a lot of money as well in there. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. We understood that we can save money, and I think Nick is the best person to explain how much money you can save. Nick, please come in.
Thank you, Wim. My name is Nick Ruiter. I'm a project manager at Omgevingsdienst Eimond in the Netherlands. It's an environmental agency. And for us, the biggest success of the project was obviously the LAMP platform that we built. You already mentioned it a little bit, Wim, that it was a success because the SMEs in our port area are able to save a lot of money on their energy purchases by trading peer-to-peer sustainable energy. So it's not directly producing renewable energy, but it's making it able to locally produce and also consume the energy that we have in the area, which creates cost reduction. Thank you, Wim.
Thank you, Nick. Clear message. And I would like to invite Yvonne now. As mentioned, the project was also about developing new technologies and how to use these new technologies in a port environment. So I think Yvonne is on the right spot to present the blue, well, not the blue, but the energy pontoon. Please go ahead, Yvonne.
Hello. So my name is Ivan Timmerman. I'm a shipbuilding engineer and naval architect. And I've been busy with the renewable energy about 10 years in the port environment with the offshore windmill parks that were being constructed, or now of course constructed. And the PECS project, we built a second pontoon, that's an energy production and storage pontoon, where we use the combination of solar panels, 96 square meters to be exact per container, and 6 vertical turbines combined with the energy storage.
It's worth seeing. So thank you very much, Yvonne. It's floating within behind the lock in the Port of Ostende. He's painting the colors of Miami from Lowry on it, so it can go to the silent ocean very soon. So that's his next destination. So Lowry, if you can inform him about what to do over there. Next question I would like to ask to all of you is related to the obstacles. We have been working 3-4 years very hard, each in our own way, on developing their own pilot projects. And I cannot imagine that life has been so smooth that there are no lessons learned from obstacles. So we'll ask each of you, what kind of obstacles have you met in realizing your pilot project? And I would like to focus, let's say, on the ones which have annoyed you the most. So don't hesitate. Nobody's listening here, so you can speak freely. Go ahead.
You will have to nominate someone to start, Wim.
As I said, Jerm, you're the one.
Yes, okay. Well, yeah, thank you. You know what I'm going to say, and it has been Brexit. It was a surprise. I'm a European, and I'm stranded here on an island outside Europe at the moment. It was a surprise to me in 2016. An immense surprise when the vote went the wrong way. You're talking about the one that annoyed me the most. Well, that was it. And forgive me, this is not a good analogy, but at the Battle of Crécy, the French turned up for a fight with swords, and the British brought longbows, which no one had ever seen. Well, in the 2016 choice referendum, someone was using instruments of mass data analysis and behavioral science that had never been seen before, and that kicked us out of Europe. I don't pretend to understand it, but there was a more particular point at the unveiling of the link span, which you may remember, for which Europe put in £500,000, and I had provided the European logo as you now see it, but when they brought down the minister, there was a plaque I hadn't seen before that didn't even mention European funding. So if you want something that really annoyed me, that was it. But what is actually inspiring is that over 20 years of dealing with environmental work, I put in, and you will remember this, Wim, we put in a heat transfer pump, a seawater heat transfer pump in about 10 years ago. And the current ferry port manager at the time just said, well, give me the money and I'll do it. And he wanted to acknowledge nothing about Europe or anything else. Well, the difference now is that everything that we started doing 20 years ago and everything that we've done, the UK is now trying to catch up on. And it is unbelievable to me that UK funding is now pouring into the port for the projects that had been coming into Europe. And that has been a surprise for this government, that it's pushing the green agenda in a manner we weren't expecting. So that's me from the most annoying part to perhaps the most inspiring. We're moving forward without European money, although we are going into the Horizon programme, which I'd like to chat with people about later. But thank you. You knew I was going to say Brexit.
So that's why I give you the floor at first, Jeremy. So you could hang the right painting on the right wall. So yes, Jan, I'm sure that in your impressive roads that you have been working with Indaclor and Indaver in Dunkirk, I cannot imagine that everything was I would say, a billiard flat process. So if you can give a little bit your impressions where you have been stumbling across mostly, which really made you nervous on realizing.
As you can imagine, an industrial type of investment such as this one, it takes a lot of time. So we started thinking about this 10 years ago, and we are very near to the end. So we are very happy to be there where we are today. There is two main issues that have been stumbling blocks for us in the first place. We have had trouble. We have had issues in getting our environmental permits alive. We knew it is a complicated site in itself. We are a Seveso level 2 site, so we are prepared because that is what we are doing at our Antwerp sites as well. We have Seveso sites in Belgium as well, but legalistic obeisance has been a great challenge. And we have found that throughout the process that translations of European regulations into local regulations not always are being done in the right time or in due time, I would say, and that's what we have suffered from. It has taken us more or less 1 year to overcome the overall issue on the environmental permit, and not coming from us not being prepared, but coming from legalistic environment. And the other one we have suffered a lot from is the pandemic in the end. As with in all countries, our site has been thoroughly shocked by measures which needed to be taken by governments to allow for the right sanitary measures to be in place. And there again, yes, this has we have worked our way through. We have always been organizing things the way it should be. We have always been able to have the site open, but nevertheless, the overall surroundings with respect to lead times, delivery times, has caused a major disruption that I have not seen in my 25 years of experience. Those are the two main ones. But I started with saying that we are now starting up this installation, and it is in production. It needs to be optimized, and that is the very good news about it.
And we only can applaud all the work and the patience that you have had in order to realize this fantastic project in the port of Dunkirk. I mean, I'm absolutely impressed. We have been following with the partnership. We have been following your progress, and I think it's a hell of a job. But I think your message can be taken on board by Valter Selen from ESPO. He is the European seaport representative dealing with environmental issues, and I think that's the message that he will be able to take up. On the pandemic, it's clear that also there it's the same issue. We have the same challenge in different countries, but everybody takes his own way of challenging, or let's say taking measures and making the interpretation in a different way. Even between the south and the north of France, there was a different interpretation of the same rules. Thank you very much for this very clear analysis. And I would like to ask Laurie to give with his helicopter view on the project, and with his interaction with the research institutions, where he stumbled most on his road to Miami.
I think Jerry said the one thing that's on both our minds here in the UK, of course, is Brexit. Biggest frustration wasn't even on the cards when we started this project, and it's incredibly frustrating. The bit of rose-tinted nationalism took us down that path, but I shall leave that to sit for a little while. I think we obviously come at the project a bit differently. So we come at it, as you said, with very much more of a helicopter perspective into this. And the biggest thing for me, I think, was data. You know, I'm an academic. I like data. I like numbers. They tell me things, and then I can tell other people things with those numbers. But it was, I think we come at it with we can present a model. That model requires information, and the assumption I think we make as academics is that data is available, it's readily there. And it was quite a steep learning curve to realise in ports that not all this information is available. It's not recorded, or it's not in a format that would work in a engineering sense, perhaps. So it was going through quite a few months of processes of understanding things such as financial records to act as a proxy to work out carbon savings, for example, setting up data collection systems with the pilot partners to better understand or better collect that data. And I think once you've got that data, it's very powerful because it's a very powerful management tool. We understand where we are. We can make predictions about where things might go. We can make intelligent investments. But the biggest learning was the complexity and the nature of some of the data storage systems were not perhaps what we would have expected, sort of sitting in an ideal world. And I think that's just a sort of reflection of reality. And what I hope that we've managed to do is, with our partners in the project, is come up with ways of showing how valuable that data is, but also setting in place the systems to allow that data to be collected moving forwards, that it does present us with the options for management and for future carbon reduction investment, so making that business case a lot more readily.
Thank you very much, Laurie. I think this is another point that Valter can take in his pocket, especially for SME ports. I mean, we all know that the Champion League sports, they have so-called data collection systems for themselves, but especially in the 1,250 SME ports in Europe, and even for marinas, I think it's an even bigger issue. I just can confirm from the Port of Ostende, its data is really something which is very hard to get and not so easy to collect and also to store. And I think Nick will be able to build further on this kind of topic. So please, Nick, what have been for you and your colleagues the biggest stumbling block in your road to the system that you have developed?
Well, I really hate to say it, but the largest obstacle was for us the COVID pandemic, which of course started last year. The project was running quite smoothly until then, but we are a little bit dependent on investments from outside the scope of the project into rooftop solar PV systems, which we then want to connect to our platform. And at the start of 2020, halfway 2020, we really saw that the SMEs were not really willing to further invest in rooftop solar PV because of the economic drawbacks from the pandemic. However, it was also somewhat of a blessing because we managed to work around it. We have set up an investment fund, and that will really help the SMEs to invest in the solar PV, which then we will connect to the platform. But it takes a little bit longer, so it was somewhat of a drawback. Regarding the data collection, well, I think we have managed to solve it quite well. We obviously have a digital system. It monitors everything we do, all the kilowatt hours, all the solar production, all the consumption of electricity that goes over the platform. So, well, I think that's a part that we managed to solve using a somewhat modern digital infrastructure with the local energy market.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think this is a clear assessment of the development of the energy platform. I'm sure that David de Bok from Xant Windmills, he is interested to sell his new turbine to the energy cluster, but I would like to ask him if he can, you would see what they are been producing, David. It's quite impressive. So, but we will ask you to close the camera because we are in the session, in the joint session, in the panel discussion. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for your help. So last but not least, Yvonne, who has been hammering, screwing, whatever, in the last 4 years of this life within the project. Please go ahead.
So for us, it was quite on the technical side, because our company was just founded in 2016, so in the early start of the program. And so the biggest challenge was putting everything in order, because our invention is the wind wall formation, where we use the vertical wind turbines in a synchronized setup. This has never been done before globally, and that was very challenging to find the right way to do it. So there were a lot of hiccups in the beginning, but everything came well a few years ago already, and but that was one of the biggest challenges. Secondly, was also the automatization and electronics, because one of the things that we saw is that when we compare to countries outside of Europe, I must say, we're very far behind. We have seen that some of the technologies here are a decade behind on, for example, American or Asian technology. And that was something that really opened up our eyes, that it was very difficult to find the right people to be able to support us in those areas, and that the general companies almost always use the same brand, I would say, have a fixed contract with that brand and do not use any other technology, and that is shamefully extremely outdated. And that showed us that it was really challenging, that we had to do it ourselves. What was totally not what we wanted to do in the program. We wanted to focus on the turbines and the storage, but we had to take more onto our scope than was initially the idea.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. If I understand very well, the European management culture is not very open to innovation. And I understand that entrepreneurship is not very well promoted, notwithstanding the fantastic and Barnum messages which are promoted and sent out by different institutions. So I think this is also an element that maybe Walter can pick up for his final speech, because this is a very clear demand from port companies and port authorities to have a more space and more room for investing in or giving platform to young entrepreneurs to develop new technologies. So I think this is a very important element to take with us on board. We are now at the end of the project, and I will ask each of you 2 questions. First of all, has the international cooperation or the cross-border cooperation, has this been of any value to the realization of your project? And second question is, what kind of suggestions, recommendations, tips can you give for other ports and port authorities or port companies to go in the direction of the greening of their activities in SMEs, SME ports and marinas? So that's a double question. And in order to give Jeremy more time to think, I will ask Yvonne maybe to start to answer these 2 questions. So first question number 1, cross-border cooperation. Has it been of any value for your work? And secondly, what kind of tips, recommendations, suggestions can you make both economically as maybe technologically, excuse me for the word, for ports and port authorities and other institutions related with circular economy to pick up? Thank you.
So on the cross-border, it was very good to have this kind of size of partnership, so that we could see what was going on in the other regions. Normally, we were going to also put one of the pilots in Holland, so in the other region, but because of COVID, we all saw it a bit fall apart because of all the blockages, the restrictions and everything that halted that. So it's a bit a shame that we weren't able to do that. But I saw there was a lot of positive that we had and that we learned from each other. The other question from, can you repeat it again?
Don't pretend that we're in the same room, Yvonne. The second question is, what kind of tips, suggestions, recommendations can you give for other startup companies, for other port authorities, for other SME ports, for marinas, for circular economy companies to work on for a future, I mean, to green. I mean, the key objective of the project is to green the ports, and by implementing new technologies. What kind of recommendation would you give them to work on? Both companies, enterprises, young starters, as well as authorities, which might be potential clients.
So the first thing would be that to use the tools that were developed in those programs, because I think that is the first that they have an idea of what is possible. Because it has been clear that any port can produce enough own energy to do something of a reduction. So that is one tip, is to really go look at the tools, and to also contact local companies and how they can assist them, because there is a lot of companies doing renewables. There's a lot being developed, and that the ports really need the support, and that they need to cooperate.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you very much. Nick, can you please give your feelings about cross-border cooperation? And secondly, also about what kind of recommendations you can give based on your experience of realizing, and stress really realizing, this joint partnership with your enterprises in the region of Eemond.
Yes, of course. So for us, one of the large benefits of cross-border cooperation was the knowledge exchange. Directly at the start of the project, we had a lot of help, for example, from the knowledge partners, which helped us estimating the potential for renewable energy generation in our area. It was really helpful, not only for for doing this project, but also for the future, for determining what choices we have to make. Do we need to generate wind energy, rooftop solar, solar thermal energy, that sort of choices. Well, and the tips we have for other ports and port authorities is really cooperating with the SMEs in the port area. Without cooperation, if we have to think of everything ourselves, we couldn't do this. We couldn't make this a real big success. Now we have, due to the cooperation. For example, the SMEs, they told us we have trouble investing in rooftop solar PV. We need some kind of fund. We need some place where we can get money, where we can get a loan or something, and we have set that up. We would not have known that if we did not cooperate with the SMEs. So that's a big tip for other authorities.
So I understand very clearly that cooperation has been of added value for you and your partnership, both locally as internationally. So that's an important message to take. Also, I wink again to Walter to pick this with him in his basket when he goes to grandmother for the lunch. Laurie, please, you know the two questions. Number one, did you prefer to stay in Southampton, or was there any issue to exchange with your partners on the continent? And secondly, what kind of recommendation would you give, especially, I mean, I'm referring to what you said before on data collection. What kind of recommendation would you give there for port authorities, circular economy, partnerships, etc.?
So in response to the first question, a definitive yes. Huge value in these cooperations, and as an institution, our business is knowledge. That's what we deal in, an application of that knowledge, and what we can learn from cooperating with others is far beyond what we could ever do on our own as a university, in its basic sense. And I think, echoing what Nick was saying, that we've just learned huge amounts and shared that expertise, which has allowed us to do things we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. And following that thread, the other thing, of course, is with a project like this and the cooperations that it introduces, is the impact we can have as a collaborative group is far beyond what any one of us could have done on our own. And if we look at just say the maritime sector, there are huge steps that have to be made towards decarbonising the sector. I think estimates are about 3% of global GHG emissions in maritime. So the only way we're going to achieve that is if we all work together and we share knowledge, we share expertise, and we share our experiences. And it is something I very much hope we can continue to do, that we don't hear and bang on that problem, but I'm sure Jerry will, but not to become isolated in the UK from our partners who have that knowledge. On a personal note, the other thing obviously this project gave me was a bit of a chance to learn some Dutch and practice that with some very friendly Dutch speakers. So thank you for that. In terms of what I can suggest for other ports, I think the first thing to do is understanding the operation actually of what's happening in that port environment. And it sounds like an obvious thing, because I think if we sort of spoke to any port manager, they say, well, I know exactly what happens in my port. But it's more fundamental than that. It's understanding the material, the energy, the stuff that's moving through the port. And when you've got a fundamental grasp of that understanding, we can start moving into a space where we can manage that. And it might be quite simple measures at first, so things like installation of solar to offset some energy. That's quite a basic level measure. But it also might be something more complex, like we're seeing with Indiclor, where we start sharing materials between businesses. And actually you start seeing, again, economic benefit and quite significant carbon and energy saving benefit. And these things start to come together, but it's really understanding what's happening and how do we join these people up. And then there's that top layer of how do we get them to talk to each other? How do we get people to talk to each other in a way that they trust each other? And I think this is something that maybe Nick came across with the LEM, is getting all the people in a room, the stakeholders who need to talk together to make these things happen, is probably the first step. And it's the bit that gives us the understanding. We then work out the data and the management systems we need, and then we can start cooperating even more and realizing those really big savings and those really big options for carbon reduction.
So if I understand well, Laurie, I'm back in Jamaica. You're in Miami, I'm in Jamaica. These kind of exercises like PECS are quite useful to bring out, especially partners together, and to, let's say, to share experiences. So I think what I learned from your message is that one project like PECS is not enough. That's what I have understood.
Yes, yeah, definitely. We need more of these kind of collaborations and projects.
Okay, Jan, also for you, the same double questions. On the first place, how do you see the experience we're working cross-border? And secondly, what kind of recommendation, knowing what impressive part you have been doing by setting up the company in Dunkirk port area, what kind of recommendation can you give for people to be better prepared?
To be a bit frank, we were already present as a group of companies in the UK, in the Netherlands, and in Belgium, of course. So we've learned about France within this project. So, and we do hope that through our cooperation with CEREMA, which was not known to us, that we are able to have a good spread of the ideas of the overall tools that have been developed throughout in this instance France at first, and work it through the other countries. So with respect to collaboration, well, we are doing all of these things different. I've seen the Dutch pragmatism. I've seen the enthusiasm of the UK colleagues. In France, we learn to be very persistent to overcome difficulties, and in Belgium, yeah, we have a kind of stubbornness and drive to go on and to finish things. So that's been confirmed, but happy to have been to have chosen for the French option, because originally we had three options. We were looking at ports, we were looking at the port of Rotterdam, we were looking at the port of Antwerp, and we were looking to the port of Dunkirk. Well, in the end, we have turned up in Dunkirk. Happy this has gone this way, And you see, these three harbors we were looking at, yeah, they all fit in this type of a project, in this 2Cs type of a project. With respect to what I could eventually advise to ports, I've learned a little bit about ports now. I'm not a port expert at all. I started learning about this in this project. What I did learn is that they handle a complexity of issues. It's a remarkable world, and I'm glad to have seen that. But what I do from a helicopter point of view and as a non-specialist see is that ports mainly when they report about their efforts and how they have done, that you hear cubic meters of tonnages or cubic meters of containers and numbers of containers they have handled and they have managed. I do not really hear a lot about how ports have managed sustainability and energy savings and carbon reductions. So I would like to hear more about that. I would like to advise ports to come up with those numbers and to look for those numbers apart from the economic element, which is the number of containers and the cubic meters and tonnages handled. Those CO2 savings in millions of tons, they are as interesting, perhaps even more interesting.
I thank you very much, Jan. I think this is another, let's say, nice letter that you have been writing to Valter Selen from ESPO, who is managing the Green Ports Initiative. And we also know that the National Bank of Belgium has its own way of calculating, whereby not the numbers and the let's say the cubic meters and the container number of containers are calculated, but also the added value, the social aspect is at least taken into consideration, and maybe also the element of environmental sustainability can be an element to evaluate the functioning and the operationability of a port. And I'm sure that Jeremy will give there an extra layer of paint to this discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Wim and Jan. Yes, you're spot on. And in my first response to the advantages of cross-border cooperation, Jan has flagged up something that might illustrate his point. As part of our project, my job was to assess the amount of carbon the port produced. I started with 2018 and then I did 2019. And then very shortly afterwards, the British government asked ports that were handling more than 1 million tons of cargo a year to do the same thing, which meant I was 2 years ahead of all the other ports that had to do it. We are one of the very few ports who have reported our tonnage of carbon, 56,000 tons in 2018, and nearly 10,000 tons more in 2019. And this brings us to the complexity of issues that Jan just brought about. And can I just quickly say, because I'll forget at the end, thank you very much for having this in English. The command of it by you guys puts us in the dark. It really does. Superb. Thank you. And the complexity is that everyone expects carbon reductions. And we can't give them carbon reductions because our management team, quite rightly, are looking to compete for trade with other ports, which is what we will continue to do. So when I go to people and say we're going to reduce our carbon, I say we're going to have to reduce it on an intensity basis. So we will reduce the amount of carbon that we produce per passenger, per lorry, per ton of cargo, but we will not be able to give you absolute carbon reductions. We will eventually have to do that, but this is where the word net zero comes in. It's a cheat word, I know, but everything that we've done with PECS has put us on a route to start reducing or to understand how to reduce our carbon. It is a complex subject, and one of the biggest complexities is having the public understand exactly what it is we have to do. We have to keep bringing the trade in. The IMO has done fantastic work since the end of the Second World War in improving safety and preventing pollution. They've done that as a great hard slog over 70 years. And people now expect changes, and we need changes in a very short time frame. We can give them small changes over a longer time frame if we want to keep operating as a port. But what the cross-border cooperation has given us on a practical level is the fact that nothing that I have done would have been done without it. When I say that I don't have a budget, I have never had a budget in 20 years of working at the port. I go to the capital infrastructure program, I pick out something that the port is definitely going to do anyway. And then I would go to Europe and look at where we could gain European funds to make them more, not necessarily more sustainable, just European funds. But those European funds were always about sustainability. Now the route that has put us on has got us ahead of other ports. It's presented us with headaches, but it's presented us with headaches that we were going to have anyway, and we're ahead of the game. As far as the second part, my recommendations to people dealing with ports is don't assume ports know about what you can do, because we don't. I had not even looked at air quality before Wim suggested it as an extension to PECS. As it turned out, again, that was a year ahead. It was only after that that Portsmouth was designated the 8th most polluted city in Europe. And we now have a congestion zone coming in. It's not from the port, it's from the nitrous oxides emissions from cars. But the big cudgel, the big sword, Damocles sword that is hanging over the head of every port is particulate matter. We are only now starting to understand. There was a very recent coroner's report in London, and the death of a young girl was attributed to air quality. That is a step change in UK legal law, legal proceedings. And we need to we've always thought of a port as pollution. If you say pollution in a port, everyone gets in the boat and starts throwing out cotton wool to soak up the oil. We've never really thought about air pollution. We've never thought of noise pollution, but it is all pollution, and that's what we have to start dealing with now. So keep things on a practical level. If you're coming in, try and understand the port. The stupidities of some things are quite amazing. I put in £158,000 worth of LED lighting, but I could not do it until I proved that we would regain the money spent within 4 years. That was impossible until I spoke to one of the fitters on the port, who said that they had to hire a cherry picker, which was £80 an hour for 2 hours. It took 2 fitters to change a light bulb, and we had to do that twice a year because the old light bulbs didn't last very long. The moment I had that information, you put it in a spreadsheet, and suddenly putting up LED lights when they were 6th generation at that time works. So it's putting the information together and putting up with some copper-bottomed bigotry from old sailors that you'll get in ports. But that's really it from me as far as recommendations goes. You have to acknowledge the dichotomy. And the dichotomy is that we have to reduce carbon while still bringing in great big polluting ships. Hopefully that will change in a few years. We've got our first LNG ships coming in 2024 and 2025. And that is presenting us with new headaches because the British government does not recognise LNG as a future fuel source. The slippage, I'm talking to scientists amongst you, you'll be aware of methane slippage and the damage that does to the ozone layer. So it is a transformational fuel change that we need, and LNG is not it. But nonetheless, those ships are coming in and we will need to supply them with fuel. What I hope to supply them with also is electricity while they're alongside, and that electricity, because they'll be drawing less than 0.5 megawatts an hour, will hopefully come from port storage batteries. So the challenges are there, and they wouldn't have been addressed without PECS, the European Regional Development Fund, and this principle of reducing any challenges to the free movement of goods and services. In the UK now, we need to find a new principle. And that new principle seems to be air quality and not killing the people we serve. That's it at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I think you have put a few eggs in the basket of ESPO. I'm sure that we will have another issue there for replying. We have now about, let's say, 5 to 6.5 minutes for the public to come in with questions. Dear public, you have an excuse panel of partners, of project developers, of port managers. So please take the floor and go ahead if you would like to ask a question. Just in case that you ask a question, present yourself and make the question short and bright. And please also mention who you want to ask the question to. Thank you. You have the floor now for 5/6.10 seconds. Thank you. If anyone feels like happy to go for the questions, be our guest. We are 47 people altogether in the room, so please don't be shy. As I said, nobody will listen what you're saying. I will not install a premium section in this game, so I will not. There is nothing to win if you ask a question. I'm sorry to say. The only thing you can win is an access to the movie of PECS, of a free vision to the movie of PECS. Insofar there are no questions, and it's a pity because I think one question. So, okay, go ahead.
Would that be me?
Go ahead, Casper.
Thank you very much. Hello, and thank you very much for your interesting talk on all these very interesting subjects. What I'm very interested in is your focus on also these air quality measures. And could you elaborate a little bit on how have you done it? What sensors have you been using, and how is it functioning? And what are you using this data for? Can you ask people not to turn on their engines? I guess you can't do that. So could you elaborate a little bit on what are the impacts of these air quality measures that you've done, and talk about how you've done it?
In that case, I would like to ask probably Jeremy and Mr. Pachidis to answer a question. So first I would like to ask Jeremy to answer, and then Mr. Pachidis will take over. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning and thank you. The air quality sensors we've put in, as a municipal port, we had to go out to tender, and we got 5 companies that tendered. Of those 5 companies, 4 of them appeared to be run by people who wanted to make a great deal of money out of what they were doing. And the 5th applicant was a local technologist who'd already put in low power wide area network throughout Portsmouth to read automated water meters. So he had LP1 all over Portsmouth, all over the Isle of Wight, going up north to Havant. And that meant that in connecting the air quality sensors together, I would not need to pay a monthly SIM card fee. Now that may sound like a ridiculous reason to select one applicant, but what it pointed out to me was that he had a technological handle on everything. So we went with him, and again, coming down to practical measures, some of the bigger companies, the cost of the sensors were pretty much the same, somewhere between 2,000 for the smaller units to 5,000 for the larger units. This is the ones that will pick up 6, 7, 8 different types of pollutants. But what they wanted was then about 500 to 1,000 pounds per unit for us to read the data and for them to keep it on a cloud server. This meant that my budget of around £40,000 would be used up in about 2 years. The technologists we've used bought these sensors off the shelf and put them in rugged, weatherproof electrical boxes. He gave me the choice of subscribe. By this, he knew that I was a real skinflint and didn't like opening my wallet. He gave me the choice of subscribing to an AIS outfit that would give us the positions of the ships. What I asked him to do was put in a patch, which they used a software developer for, that used a geographical zone around the port and picked up any ships coming into it. And that was a one-off fee of £1,800 rather than an £1,100 per annum subscription fee. So they are recording. Because we're part of City Council, I've sent those recordings through to a full-time analyst at City Council. And what we're going to look at is not particularly the liability of the port, but that's how I sold them to the port boss, to say we need to prove we're not killing people. But more to the point, we need to visualize the data for public consumption so that the people of Portsmouth can go online and look at real-time air quality readings. But we need to make them sufficiently visible that they understand them. Not just so they look at a graph that says, well, these are what the levels are, but they look at a graph or a visualization that shows the limits as well as what we're pumping out. So it is very interesting. You can see the day I put them in, or the day they first started working, I took out a ship in fog at 4 in the morning, and you can see the particulate spikes. So it's interesting stuff. It's early days. And it would strike terror into most ports and would have struck terror into our hearts a few years ago. But much like everything else, claiming ignorance of pollution when you know you're bringing the ships in is not going to be a defense in the future. Sorry, so that really is my answer on that one. If you have any further question on it, please do.
Can I ask Michalis Pachidis to come in and to give his comment on this issue? Thank you.
I can't. Hello, everybody. My name is Michali from Restaurant team. We are more in the data economy, let's say, and data communication as a supporting function on everything that goes with sensoring and gateway functionalities and so on. I can't agree more with what Jerry told or explained. It's the same. And even what's more important, I think, is that from the port perspective, you need to understand that data and everything that goes along with data, even identity of sensors or objects, not only individuals, you need to have this in control. You need to own that as well. You need to have something like a strategy about how will you deal with data. It's very useless if you start to measure stuff and you gather information, but you're not able to share it, or you're not able to benefit from this data economy. Also in other use cases where everybody has his speciality and you want to make some kind of a system where we can profit from the gains of somebody else and share that matter with somebody else. So I just wanted to add that, because from a data perspective, the data management of that shouldn't be expensive, but should be well thought about it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pachidis. On extra comment on the statements of Jeremy. Mr. Tuinman, is this does this suit your hunger?
Yes,
for data?
yes. Thank you very much. Yeah. I have a small question more, if it's okay. Have you thought about the perspectives of this? Have you thought of perhaps providing some discount for ships that emit less particulate matter, or so that they are actually doing something about their exhaustion?
Yes, I have actually. It's something I've discussed with Mark Webb, who is, just give me a nod if Mark is on this call, would you? And it is something that we can do in the future. And one of the things is that at the very practical level, we have something called the Ringelmann scale, which is how local environmental officers measure black smoke. So if you're chucking black smoke out of your chimney and it's the wrong color for too long, they hold up a card which is shades of gray and black. And if it proceeds to be too black for over a given period of time, you can be fined. Well, on the port, we are not yet at the stage where I can go to the boss and say, don't let these ships in, they're polluting too much. But we are at the stage where we can ask operational managers to go out with the Ringelmann scale and hold them against the ship's emissions stack and say at the captain's level, Captain, you're throwing out black smoke. Can you have a chat with your chief engineer? And if they can't change that, then we push it up the scale. The reason I give that is I got onto a small aggregates boat a year ago. And as I was walking towards it to go out as a pilot, it was belting out black smoke. And I assumed that that was just an old engine. But when I got on board, I mentioned it to the captain. And he said, oh, we're keeping the shaft generator on. We're keeping the main engine running. And we're taking shaft generation for electricity off it because we don't usually stop the engine unless it's more than 8 hours. And of course, that's got to stop. We have to stop that kind of mentality. It is the old chief engineer's mentality. It's the same mentality that says, I'm not switching my generators off just to switch into an electrical shore supply for 2 hours. But that has to change. So the answer is yes. At the accountancy level, we can offer those discounts for less polluting ships. But just at the moment, we still need ships to keep coming in. The big challenge is going to be cruise liners of the future. But strangely enough, COVID, I think, has probably seen off many of the older ships that polluted more. So, no, it's a good thought. And we are looking at it. But there's only so many swings I can have at the port director. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I understand that there is, I mean, in a normal condition, we would open the beer fridge and put the bottles on the table. Unfortunately, it's not possible. I would like to ask Mr. Valter Selen, thank you very much, Exquis panel, for your contributions, your very sharp analysis and your very sharp answers on the 4 years working within the PECS partnership. And I think this has definitely given food for thought to Mr. Valter Selen, who is now he will now come in, and he's representing, let's say, well, let's ask Walter to present himself in the partnership. Mr. Selen, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Wim. I hope you can all hear me and see me, hopefully at least hear me. That's the most important part. I would like to thank you all very much for the invitation to be with you here today. I've been following the discussions and the panel debate with much interest. I understand I have a very, very full basket of input and thoughts that I'm bringing with me after today. And we will see how many of your sort of points and concerns that I managed to address within my short presentation, but rest assured that I've taken extensive notes, and I think it's very useful for me personally as well to really hear more about this excellent initiative, the PESC project, and also to get more insight on what the situation looks like when it comes to environmental management and climate efforts from the small and medium-sized port perspective, and that sort of level of action as well. So if it's okay with all of you, I would like to just for the next slide, maybe. Thank you very much. I will be giving a brief presentation on the decarbonization efforts of European seaports. It's a very broad topic, but I'll try to make it as concrete and tangible as possible. And we base that on our vision from ESPO's side, which we will present soon in our forthcoming green guide of European ports as part of a green future. So if we go to the next slide. I will just like to clarify off the bat, and maybe that's old hat to most of you, but it's still important to keep this in mind when we're talking about the efforts that ports are undertaking when it comes to greening, that ports are multitaskers, and we've seen that, for instance, in this project that you've been presenting and discussing today, but also in general, that depending on what port you're looking at or what aspect of ports you're looking at, you can really have a plethora of different roles and activities that ports are doing, including, for instance, not only multimodal transport hubs and gateways to the world, but also providing hubs of innovation and digitalization and areas where we could have potentially a lot of clean and renewable energy generation as well. So these sort of diverse roles is really crucial to keep in mind. And if we take that with us for the next slide, please. we see that these complex entities really need to be sort of recognized when we're discussing how to green the port and how ports can contribute to decarbonization. So we need to apply a differentiated approach really between the port authority itself and the influence and power that that entity has within the port area. And then look at all the other different stakeholders in the port area as well and see how the port authority, which is what ESPO is representing, how we can help facilitate the greening of the larger port area and the local community outside of the port area as well. So if we go to the next slide, we try to illustrate that here in this graph, where we see the dark blue port authority in the upper left-hand corner, where the port authority really has a lot of influence, of course, within its own remit. And then if you start moving outside the sort of the core operations of the port authority, you see a sort of a lessening of the direct influence and power of the port authority. This is not to say that the Port Authority doesn't have an important role to play in these other areas, but just to really make sure that we right-size our expectations of what ports can and cannot do in this work. If we go to the next slide, we see then that with this recognition of the limits and the possibilities of what port authorities can do when it comes to greening, it's clear that environmental issues are on top of the agenda for European port authorities, which is of course both a very reassuring fact for me as a sustainability advisor with ESPO, but also, of course, a worrying sign that these issues are becoming more and more pressing for ports all over Europe. We see that air quality has remained the top one priority for ports since 2013. Climate change has really climbed up the ranking of priorities from 10th priority in 2017 to second priority in 2020. So it's really moved from the last top position to almost the top position in just 3 years, reflecting the urgency indeed of these issues for ports. So with that strong mandate, if we go to the next slide, we need to look at, of course, then what the legislative and regulatory framework is that ports are operating on when it comes to the European level. Where a lot of it is set by the European Green Deal, of course, in terms of the parameters. We recently saw an agreement on the European Climate Law, which enshrines some of the ambitions outlined in the European Green Deal, specifically setting a target for this famous term that we mentioned earlier, net zero in terms of emissions by 2050, and also outlining a goal of at least 55% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030. So we have a sort of a long-term goal and a mid-term goal, and the possibility as well of a goal for 2040. And then the European Green Deal also sets a separate target that's not part of the climate law, which is 90% CO2 emission reductions by 2050 for transport. This, of course, includes maritime, as do the goals enshrined in the climate law itself. And then on top of all of these these requirements, we also see upcoming requirements as part of the so-called Fit for 55 package. So all of the legislation that's being introduced or revised following on from the European Green Deal ambitions to basically deliver on the goals set for 2030 and 2050 in terms of reduction of emissions. So with these very ambitious goals in mind, we can go to the next slide on the ESPO commitments. So if we look at the European level and not only on the individual ports, we see that ESPO as a European organization for port authorities is committed to help deliver the European Green Deal and its ambitions. And the main priority in doing that is, of course, trying to green shipping, which is a priority for us, where a large chunk of the emissions in the port area and, of course, from the maritime sector as a whole comes from shipping activities. But we also recognize that European ports have their own part to play, and we have our own burden to shoulder. So we're committed to playing our own part in helping the shipping sector make this transition towards decarbonization, but also to lead by example, by greening our own fleet and our operations, and also by undertaking various bottom-up initiatives, such as the PECS initiative we've been discussing here today, which I would note as well. I would really very much appreciate if I could add to our list of green good practices. So I will definitely connect with Wim after the session to get that included there. So if we go to the next slide, please. Looking at a little bit the state of play, we see that ports are increasingly stepping up their efforts to aid decarbonization efforts, with green services being increasingly provided in European ports. The two graphs here, and basically all the graphs you will see presented with a green background, are sourced from the 2020 ESPO environmental report, which is publicly available and based on data from the Ecoports network. So we see a large share of ports providing some sort of OPS, and about a third of ports that we surveyed also providing LNG bunkering in some way, shape, or form. So we are clearly trying from the European ports perspective to live up to our own side of the deal here when it comes to reducing emissions. Furthermore, on the next slide, we will see that we're also trying to incentivize shipping more directly through financial incentives. Of course, we note that these are a very small share of their overall operational costs, these incentives and port dues, but nonetheless, we see that almost 60% of ports are providing so-called differentiated dues for greener vessels. And that could be incentives based on noise reduction, air quality improvements from the vessel, the use of onshore power supply or other alternative fuels. It really depends a little bit on what port you're in and what the particular issue is that they want to prioritize in that individual port. Next slide, please. We also see that when it comes to not only to decarbonization, but the sort of the effects of climate change as well, that's a growing concern for ports. Of course, investments in resilience and operational continuity will not in themselves reduce emissions, but they will help ports continue to provide their services, even if there is an operational challenge that could be connected to climate change, for instance, frequent and more intense storms, flooding, heat waves, etc. And whilst doing this retrofitting or these new investments in climate proofing your infrastructure, you can of course also try to improve energy efficiency and look at how you can lower the emissions related to these infrastructures as well. But it's a worrying picture. We see over half of ports experiencing some sort of operational challenge for the first time as of 2020 when it comes to challenges related to climate change. Next slide, please. So what we're trying to do from ESPO's side more concretely is can really be divided up into three sort of barrels or pillars, if you will. The first aspect is that of environmental management, where we have initiatives both from ESPO but also from our member ports that we're trying to disseminate and trying to encourage the ports to share and promote, which today is part of. We're also involved in a lot of expert group participation. And of course, we're also closely following and lobbying key environmental files. And we discuss these environmental management issues in our dedicated ESPO Sustainable Development Committee, which also addresses issues of climate policy, where again, we're of course, as part of the European Green Deal, involved in a lot of ongoing policy negotiations and discussions, also feeding into expert groups, for instance, helping develop guidance for OPS together with the European Maritime Safety Agency. And also looking at how cruise in particular could become more sustainable. And then we have the green energy aspect of things, which is a relatively new addition to our work, and it interconnects as well with our Blue Growth network, where we're trying to follow key energy files, and we also try to look at, for instance, offshore, but also hydrogen and energy system integration strategies that have been put forward by the Commission recently. So this is also a very interesting and new area for ports where we can perhaps contribute even more to decarbonization efforts in the future as sites of production and supply of renewable fuels and energies. Next slide, please. So just to give a brief sample of port initiatives, I realize now that I've been committing a sin by omission by not including the initiative of today on this list. But some other ideas and interesting projects that are going on is the so-called Loop project on circularity, led by the Port of Valencia. We had an interesting initiative by the Port of Bremen and Bremerhaven to do sort of a public consultation with stakeholders on what they should include in their environmental management and their work in that port. The French equivalent of ESPO, the Union des Ports Français, is doing work on a sort of French dedicated green guide for ports, which is quite interesting to look at. We also have various port coalitions on various topics. OPS is one, but you also have alliances, participation in Hydrogen Alliance, Battery Alliance, etc. And of course, Horizon 2020 projects, and the list goes on and on. And in addition to these sort of specific projects, ESPO has been compiling good practices from our member ports over time. which we will feed into an extensive dedicated online database of green good practices. And this will be presented next week at our ESPO conference. So we invite all of you here to please register and sign up. We have family deals and discounts available still. But what we would like to do basically is to provide through this database a very transparent source of good practices from all of our members in various topics, and also have sort of an internal aspect where ports can discuss these good practices and exchange ideas in a more informal setting. So if we go to the next slide, please. From ESPO's side, we have, of course, our commitments to help facilitate the greening of the sector. But tangibly, what are we doing to try to actually deliver some decarbonization, some emission savings, and improve the sustainability of the sector? I would like to briefly mention two initiatives. The first is the Ecoports network, and the second is the 2021 update of the ESPO Green Guide. If we start with the Ecoports network, I hope most of you are familiar with this network. I am myself the Ecoports coordinator for the network. And if we go to the next slide, we see that the Ecoports network has been going strong for 24 years now. It's our flagship environmental project, which also, of course, covers some climate aspects increasingly. It's a unique initiative developed by Ports for Ports, and it provides means for ports to actually self-monitor their environmental management and their improvement over time. And it's also a very good way to get some idea and to gather some of your data and track some indicators over time, so that hopefully addresses some of the discussions that were had earlier in the panel. And we see that it really provides a very transparent and reliable source of port-specific information and insight for the users and members of the network, of course, but also for ESPO, as it is our source of data for our annual environmental reports, and for policymakers that can actually see where ports are at in terms of their efforts. In terms of the membership, we have ports from 25 countries currently, and we actually have 105 Ecoports members now as of today. We also have over a fourth of ports that are PERS certified, 30 actually, and counting. And we would encourage all of the port authorities listening to please green your port and join Ecoports. And if you do, you will have access to the tools that we provide in the Ecoports network. The first is the self-diagnosis method, which is basically a passport for joining the network, and sort of a two-year checklist that we ask ports to fill in. That then allows us to track your progress and allows the port itself to track its progress for key indicators for environmental management. Then the Port Environmental Review System, or PERS, is our own specific Port Environmental Review standard, which is the only port-specific such standard on the market, which is really for those ports that wish to go the extra mile and get some clear sort of third-party verified recognition of their environmental work. And the third is the ESPO Environmental Report, which I mentioned earlier, which we produce annually and try to disseminate as widely as possible to show how much ports are already doing and where ports can do more to contribute to decarbonization of the sector. Next slide, please. We see some good growth when it comes to Ecoports PERS. Around a quarter of ports that we surveyed last year are either using ports on its own or together with other environmental management systems on the market, which is very positive. But we hope to, of course, keep growing that number as we move forward. And if we then move from Ecoports to the next slide on the ESPO Green Guide, I will not be able to go too much into the details because I will save all of the fireworks for next week's presentation. But just to give you a taste, thank you. The ESPO Green Guide is basically one of our first and our oldest policy documents or initiatives taken by ESPO as an organization. It was launched in '97, I believe, and we've been updating it continuously. And this 2021 update is really intended to be as hands-on as possible. It's aimed squarely at port authorities to provide a handbook for how ports can green their activities or continue to green their activities. And the three aims have remained the same over time. The first is to trigger port authorities to be proactive when it comes to environmental management. The second is to commit ports to sustainable development. And the third is to ensure continuous improvement. So these are really core tenets of the work that we're doing when it comes to these efforts to green. If we go to the next slide, the 2021 guide has some key elements that are new. we outline a vision of where ports can be and how they can be a part of the green future. And then based on that broader vision, we develop very stringent and sort of clear ambitions for 2025, 2030 and beyond, for that are of course voluntary, but really trying to set a high level of ambition for European ports when it comes to greening. And then we try to provide our members with the tools for how they can actually deliver on these ambitions from a port-specific perspective. So we try to guide ports for how they can develop their own roadmap to greening and what tools they have available to undertake this greening, these greening efforts, recognizing that ports are unique and often need a sort of a specific approach that's geared for their own context when they're trying to green. But every port can start somewhere and every port can contribute to these efforts. We will also include a legislative overview of the applicable EU and international legislation that relates to environment and climate issues in ports that will be updated with the next version of the guide as well. And then alongside this, we have the good green practices, of course, that feed into all of these elements, really. Next slide, please. So just giving you an idea of the ambitions, we divide them up into two camps. One is where port authorities themselves have the sort of the full or the majority of the responsibility for how they can set a course for a green future through their own roadmap and how they can communicate, again, their environmental performance and what they need to do better and more of. And then also capturing, again, the role of port authorities as a facilitator or an enabler in the wider port area. We also see how that they can play an important role in reducing environmental impacts of ports in general and encouraging the greening of the port area and also positively contributing to a green future in that way. So with that, I would like to wrap up more or less. Go to the next slide. Just some future challenges that I would like to flag that would be interesting to keep in mind. Of course, ensuring a good legislative framework is the first one with all the legislation that's being launched as part of the Green Deal. We really need to make sure that all of these files fit together, that we have a cohesive regulatory framework that's goal-based and allows some flexibility for different solutions. That needs to be very ambitious whilst avoiding stranded assets, and we mentioned LNG, and that's of course one such issue. Then connected to this is delivering on mitigating pollution whilst navigating the energy transition, where again, ports as renewable energy hubs could be an important factor in that work. And then we need to address the growing threat of operational challenges related to climate change, and also find solutions to the huge investments in infrastructure that will be needed to not only increase the resilience of ports, but also to, of course, allow for the introduction of renewable fuels for the shipping sector. So if you're interested to hear more about all of these topics and our work, we can go to the next slide. Again, we would invite you to join our ESPO conference regatta. You can still register. I'd be very happy to see you there and to keep these discussions going there. And with that, I would like to also encourage you to join Ecoports if you're not already a member. And I thank you very much for your attention. We can go to the next slide where you have my contact details. Thank you a lot again for the invitation to present at at this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. I think this is a huge menu on the table, mentioning that and showing very clearly that the environmental agenda is high on, let's say, the watch list of ports authorities and different port organizations. I think this is an important message that we can give on, and I understand that this is a wharf which is not going to be stopped very soon. On the contrary, this is a wharf which is going to expand as much as possible. Considering time issues and knowing that nobody likes too long webinars, I will give the floor to the public and ask if there is one question now to come in to ask to Mr. Selen about his presentation or about environmental issues and ports in European perspective. So this is your one lifetime chance for the public. If you have a question, please come in now. If not, we will go to the next speaker. So please raise hand and you get the floor. If not, as mentioned, I'm not giving any prize for you, for the public. If not, then I thank Mr. Selen very clearly for his very clear presentation. The presentation will be put available for all the speakers and all the participants so that they can have an overview and another reading of the issues that have been covered by Mr. Selen. And we'd like to thank him very much for presenting the policy level on the European side, as well as in his invitation for the meeting of ESPO next week online, but sailing from Valencia to the Dutch port of Ghent up to the port of Oslo in Norway. So thank you very much. Last but not least, we have Wim van Hoof. We are speaking about the future. There has been a demand for looking for new projects. So we'll ask Wim van Hoof to come in, maybe short, to give a short presentation about the future perspective of project development. Please, Wim, take the floor. The floor is yours, but know that some people are getting hungry. So thank you, Wim.
Thank you, Wim, for giving me the floor. And I understand that a lot of people want to have lunch, so I will go through my presentation as quick as possible. And it's about the future possibility for EU projects. I go quickly through the main themes, the specific objectives of a greener Europe, some European funds and programs, and what would be of interest for sustainable ports projects. The next slide, please. If you come to European projects, you have to keep in mind that there are 5 main themes goal for Europe in the next period, in this period from 2021 to 27. The projects have to be about a smarter Europe, about a greener, carbon-free Europe, better connected Europe, a more social Europe, or closer to the citizens Europe. Next slide, please. But if you look at sustainable ports, then mainly the second objective theme is of most interest, and that's about a greener Europe. But within this main goal of Europe, they have in Europe described some specific objectives. And those specific objectives are important because they are the basis of many European programs and funds. And those 7 specific objectives within a green Europe are energy efficiency measures, renewable energies, the development of smart energy systems, networks and storage, the promotion and adaptation to climate change, risk prevention, sustainable water management, transition to a circular economy, and improvement of biodiversity and green infrastructure. And I can imagine that all those issues, specific objectives, could lead to some European projects. Next slide, please. When we come to the European funds, we have in general 2 main funds in Europe. The first one is our structure and investment funds, and the second one is thematic funds. But we are in a special situation because of the COVID pandemic, and so there is a 3rd main fund in Europe for this specific period, and that's the restoration funds, or also called the Next Generation EU funds. And there are a lot of budgets in as well the regular funds, so the structure and thematic funds, as in the extra fund for this period. Next slide, please. When we come to the main funds in Europe and the programs, then we see within the structure funds, there are the Interreg programs, the operational or national programs, the European Urban Initiative, ESF, rural development programs. So that are all kind of European fund programs within the structure funds. But we have also, and most of you already know them, thematic funds. As Horizon is especially about research, or Life, it's about nature and environment, and also some other funds, not directly interesting for ports, I think. Within the next generation funds, we have the REACT EU fund, which is also going on in this year and in the next year. It's a fund for 2 or 3 years. And these are mainly funds for national projects. So we won't go into depth about these funds, but if you want to set up a port project within your own country, have a look at these funds, because there are possibilities for projects for ports in these 3 funds, but it's different from country to country. When we come to European cooperation projects for ports, then there are, for this area where we live, 2 main Interreg programs which are possible: the Northwest Europe Fund and program and the North Sea program. The PECS project was in the 2 Seas program, but the 2 Seas programs has stopped because of the Brexit. Perhaps not many people think about it, but also the LIFE program has possibility for projects, especially on climate change, on energy, etc. So also for ports. And you can build a LIFE project within your own country, within your own ports, with stakeholders and partners, but you can also work together cross-border within a LIFE project. And of course, we already said there are also other programs, but not at the scale of France, Flanders, the Netherlands, and so on. But you have also Interreg cross-border programs, for example, between Flanders and the south of Netherlands, or between Flanders and France, for example. But there are mainly cross-border, so a partner from one side of the border and a partner from the other side on the border, as well as of course, on national and regional level. Next slide, please. If you come to the most interesting Interreg programs, what I already said is the Interreg Northwestern Europe program and the North Sea program. On the slides here, you see the area for those projects, and for the Northwestern Europe program, there will be a little change in the program area. So also the 3 northern provinces of the Netherlands will be part of it, and also a part of Germany at the northwestern side will be part of the next program period. But we haven't found a new picture yet, but it could be further. And when we come to the North Sea program, here we have a new picture, and we see that whole of the Netherlands, but also a bigger area of Germany, will be part of this program area. Next slide, please. When we come to the Interreg programs, now perhaps you are familiar with it. Transnational cooperation is necessary. At least 2 countries, but my advice will be take in more countries, because that will give you more chance to be approved. The subsidy of both programs is 60%, and the main themes in those programs that are interesting for sustainable ports are smarter and greener Europe and closer to the citizens. Both aspects could lead to a project for sustainable ports. And on the more specific objectives, you see the same themes as I already mentioned for a greener Europe. And on all those themes and specific objectives, you could develop a project. Both programs aren't ready yet at this moment. They are in development, but they expect that they will be ready in autumn, by the end of this year, and a first call is expected at the beginning of 2022. Here there is said by the end of 21, but I think it will be in the beginning of 22. The proposals is the same as in the last period, in 2 phases, a concept note phase and a full application phase. Next slide, please. What I already said, perhaps not a lot of people think about it, but also the LIFE program will have possibility for ports, because it is not only about nature, it's also more about circular economy. That's a small change regarding to the last period, and also climate mitigation and adaptations and clean energy have more attention in the new program period of LIFE than it was in the former period. So it could be helpful to have a look at these LIFE programs when you want to build a European project for sustainable ports. This program starts this summer with a call. Subsidy percentage is different. That could be different between the different teams, but mainly you can say it will be 60%, but sometimes more, especially when it comes to nature and biodiversity projects. And what I already said, transnational cooperation isn't necessary, but when you have transnational cooperations, you get more points, and so in the assessment phase, you have more chance to be approved. Next slide, please. We also already think about some new projects, and also Valter Selen already did some suggestions for projects, and these are more or less the same. You can think of ports as sustainable energy hubs. I think it would be a very interesting project, for example, in the Interreg North Sea program. You can think about restoration of biodiversity in ports, both programs, also in the LIFE program. Climate adaptive ports could be of interest for ports. Circular and reuse of waste streams. We have already had an example in the PECS project, and you can think about new projects more or less in the same way for the next period. Energy cooperations, building forward on the land platform of Eimond, you can go further with projects, I think, on energy cooperation. Clean air ports could be an interesting project. Smart life concept versus safety, safe and safe, could be of interest. And also about management system to reduce carbon emissions and fuels. So, and these are only a small summing up of ideas. You could think about more ideas, of course, but it's only to give you an idea what kind of projects could I start if I want to get European subsidies in the upcoming period. This was my presentation. Thank you very much. And if there are questions, don't hesitate to ask them now or to email us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim. And I think this is an appetizer for those who are planning to have lunch very soon. So this is an amuse-gueule. Food to think about, stuff to think about, and we take the message and the programs for the future clearly in mind. I would like to conclude here, not with a high speech and blah, 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 but very short. In the first place, I would like to thank Marijke Mailleux for organizing a miracle in 4 weeks' time, together with her team and her staff and her collaborators, and she has done a miracle. So I think she deserves all the merits of organizing this closing session of the conference. And I would like to thank as well Wim van Hoof and William van Laarhoven and Simona Margarino for keeping this partnership on track during the last 4 years. It has been an intensive process. It has been, let's say, there has been hubbles and bubbles from time to time, but I think we started as a partnership and we have ended as a partnership, which I think in international cooperation is a success, especially knowing that the last half of the project was to be done under Corona lockdown isolation measures. To conclude, there is plenty of work to be done for the next 10 years. I think the presentation of Mr. Selen was very clear on that. There is even more to be done for the next 25 years. So, but let's start with the first 10 years. From the project, what do we learn especially? That there is absolute room for innovation, promoting innovation and innovation technology within the European context, both within the ports. And I think if we are losing track behind Asia and America, I think this is something which has to be taken up also on European level. And I'm thinking within the maritime sector, there's quite a lot of progress to be made. Secondly, I understand the importance of data and data management. It has been confirmed from different sources. And I think this is an issue to work on also for the near future. Thirdly, international cooperation gives added value. And I'm a bit sad to read the presentation of Mr. Selen that the Union des Ports Français is going to have a French version of the Green Ports section, which personally I do not understand. But we will discuss this with a beer in Brussels, Valter. And last but not least, I take very much the recommendation from Jan Geroms on the table that for profiling the ports, it might be good not only to look to the numbers of containers which are chasing through the port area, but maybe let's have also look not only to the social component, but also to the environmental component, so that we have a kind of, instead of also from a European perspective, that we do not only look to a kind of an economic, let's say, who has the biggest point on the table. But we are going for a kind of sustainability profile of the ports, where also the efforts which are taking for ports on improving their cooperation with the local community are taken into consideration in order to valorize their activities and their functioning. Dear guests, I'm absolutely astonished that you all are so stubborn to keep on track within this closing conference. Normally, after 2 hours, you fall on half of the participants. So thank you very much, all of you, for taking the time and taking the effort to listen and to see and to watch what this magnificent partnership has been doing over the last 4 years. And I'm sure that we will meet each other for the future. All the presentations, all the videos will be put on the website for sure. And if you have any question or any remark or any suggestion, please do not hesitate to contact the management, Marijke, Simona, Wim, Willem, and myself in order to suit your questions. Wishing you a fantastic, sunny, beautiful day, and let's meet up in normal conditions in the near future, hopefully. Thank you very much. Thank you for all.
Wim, you have been the father of the project. Thank you very much indeed.